Pacers' biggest win of the season by margin in Philadelphia. The offense humming, the ball moving, the defense pretty good in a 14-point W. Everybody chips in. What did they exactly do to look so much better? And holy cow, the backup center has arrived. It's Thomas Bryant via trade. Much to discuss on a weekend Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy weekend and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, much to get to, both from basketball and from trades, y'all's favorite. Pacers going to Philly, beat the Sixers, their most productive win by margin of the season, a 14-point W, and stories on both ends of the floor. Everybody chipped in. How did they do that? Why can't they do that all the time? They're trying to figure it out. Plus, the backup center plan is figured out. It's Thomas Bryant. If you listen to the episode from Tuesday of me talking about the center thing, I mentioned him because of the luxury tax situation for the Heat, and we'll talk about why this trade happened and what it means for the Pacers. It can't technically happen until Sunday. We'll talk about more about that when it's actually official. Let's start, though, with the hoops. The game in Philly. Pacers win 121-107 over the 76ers. Again, their biggest win of the season, their third double-digit win. I'm going to sound dorky, and then let me get to the why on this, right? I think both of the final score numbers stand out to me for different reasons after watching the game. 107 stands out to me, and 121 stands out to me because of how this Pacers season has gone. This kind of sounds made up because of what you think of the Pacers. 121 is their fifth highest scoring game of the season, right? Tied for fifth technically. But if they reach 120 in a game, which has now happened 7 times, the Pacers are 6-1. Their offense was there tonight. They got the level they needed. We'll talk about it. Defensively, 107 stands out. That's obvious. If you've watched any Pacers for the last 2 years, you know that. 107, also the fifth best night the Pacers have had defensively this season. Amazingly, their three fewest points allowed games they lost this year. But when they allow less than 112 now, they are officially 6-3. So 112 and scoring 120. 120 to 112 should be their goal for every game. That's when they hit good margins, and they got them both in this game. So what end of the floor stood out to me most defensively? For sure, because I would call this a pretty consistent performance from the Pacers in general, but they had a rocky stretch in the middle of the second quarter where it was like an 8-0 Sixers run, I think, or maybe 7-0, and they had a really rocky stretch late in the third quarter where their lead went from 15 down to 5 like in a blink with this small group out there. And that group in the late third quarter wasn't defending very well, although it was mostly they were giving up second chance points. They were actually doing okay on first shot defense, regardless of the why. Outside of those two pockets of the game, after the Pacers fell down 9-2, they defended pretty well, I thought, the whole game for different reasons all night, right? First quarter, they were doing a great job forcing turnovers, providing pressure, showing hands, and then running. And hey, guess what? The Pacers are pretty good when they can run in transition with the ball. They got up 14 threes that quarter, by far their most in a quarter of this game. Of their 24 shots, again, they forced 6 turnovers. They took 5 more shots than Philly. They were up 9 at the end of that quarter, despite being down 9-2 early, right? Very impressive to have that kind of defensive presence. And then in the second quarter, they weren't as good forcing turnovers. It's going to be hard to match 6 in a quarter ever, but still, we're at about that level. And the Sixers were making shots, keeping them in it, but forcing Philly to have 12 turnovers at halftime was just remarkable for this Pacers team, who got up the shots they wanted, were able to play in the open floor, and just looked way more consistent offensively with that kind of defensive pressure. So I was thinking, man, if Philly comes out and cleans this up, as the Pacers have in some games, the turnovers, like this could be tough for the Pacers. And there were some hints in the first half that this game could be tough for the Pacers in the second half. But instead of turnovers, the Sixers only 3 turnovers in the second half. The Pacers' shot defense was good. I know it sounds goofy because the Sixers had 12 offensive rebounds, but that honestly speaks to this as well. The Pacers forced a lot of misses in the second half. Tyrese Maxey, 3 for 8. Paul George, 4 for 9. Kelly Oubre, 4 for 9. And those are their best percentage guys. 2 for 8 for Ricky Council. Jared McCain missed all his shots. Yabusele missed all his shots. It just changed dramatically And Embiid was out for that half. He got hit in the face by Ben Mathurin in the first half, which of course changes things for the Sixers. But I thought the Pacers were doing pretty well on Embiid in the half that he did play. Obviously, the foul trouble bug hit Myles Turner in that matchup as it does, but Embiid was 4 for 9 with a turnover and 4 boards. He was minus 11. They were running all around him, making move on defense, making him settle for jumpers. I thought they defended him pretty well, right? Very good stuff from the Pacers on that end, pretty much all night. Paul George, extremely uncomfortable throughout this game. He only made 1 shot in the first half. He didn't look particularly great. Tyrese Maxey was a turnover machine in the first half. So how the Pacers did this, besides just good defense, big credit to Ben Mathurin. I thought he did a pretty good job on ball against some of the Sixers stars. Big credit to Andrew Nembhard, who did a nice job on Tyrese Maxey. But in general, a big credit to the Pacers and their planning for this game. They mixed up coverages a lot on those stars, and those guys were thinking, right? That led to turnovers for Maxey, or just Joel Embiid taking an elbow jumper that the Pacers were kind of willing to live with. Paul George never looked comfortable or even kind of zippy or threatening all night. And I know he hasn't really looked like that all season, but the Sixers have had good games from him. They've had good games from Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey tore apart the Pacers this season already, right? Very mature, impressive 48-minute defensive game from the Pacers. Maybe it won't be their best by score. Maybe it won't be their most memorable, but this is their second fewest points allowed this season in a win. The only other one being the Wizards game, which nobody remembers for their defense. The Wizards stink on offense. And the Sixers' offensive rating is bad, but they've been so hurt and not had their stars that their numbers don't really matter to me. I consider this among their best defensive games, especially considering that it came in a win. I think that was the theme for the Pacers to me, is even though their offense, again, had sputtering moments, it felt like defensively they gave themselves a chance to get through those, and they did. They did. They survived that late third quarter barrage and were up 10 again by the middle of the fourth, and they survived their second quarter issues and were up almost 13 later in that first half. So that was great from the Pacers. Offensively, though, they've got to be happy because, of course, defense was the story to me because that's how the Pacers felt comfortable. But offense has been the biggest story this season, right? The reason the Pacers have disappointed isn't because their defense is bad. It's because their offense isn't nearly at the level it was at last year for all sorts of reasons and for all sorts of players. And so 2 things stood out to me about the Pacers offensively in this game. One is an individual, and it's Tyrese Haliburton. Obviously, he was sensational. And the other is a collective team. And I actually want to start with the collective team because I have no stats for this, although I kind of do. But anecdotally, this felt like the best ball movement game for the Pacers this season. They tore apart the Mavs with a lot of very good drives and finishes at the paint, and that's great. That was one of their most consistent offensive nights of the season. They had great offensive finishing against New York and Boston, but in terms of just the ball movement and what it produced and how the Pacers wanted to get to their actions, I thought this was their best ball movement, player movement night of the year. They, like, when the Sixers would go zone, they would just boop, 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 throw here, okay, you go there, boom, easy shot in the paint, easy 3, whatever they wanted. They were getting it because the ball movement looked a little more like last year, looked a lot more crisp, right? That's what felt so obvious to me. And then they finished the game with 35 assists. Only 18 for Philly. That's an insane difference and says a lot about these team styles. Haliburton with 11. He was awesome. 7 for Andrew Nembhard. 4 for TJ McConnell. Lots of rotation players with 2 or more. 3 for Obi Toppin. 2 for Myles Turner. 3 for Pascal Siakam. 4 for Ben Mathurin, who did everything but score pretty well in this game. Really, really productive passing game for the Pacers. And when they play like that, which is how they want to play, that's the passing games they want, right? Caitlin and I talked about that earlier this week. They have a lot of passes, but they don't always feel productive. In this game, they had a lot of passes and they felt productive. And that's what their offense can look like when the ball is really popping like that. 35 assists is great. You know how I know it's great? It's tied for their most of the season. 35 matches their first New Orleans game down in New Orleans for their most of the season. The Pacers with 30 or more assists now, 10 times, they're 8-2. Now, obviously, that's a no-brainer correlation thing because an assist requires a made shot, which means points, obviously. So good assist games probably going to lead to wins. Bad assist games going to lead to losses because it's pretty tied to points. But their ball movement was directly responsible for their offense generating good shots in this game. And I thought it was a big factor in their offense looking good for the team. Lots of guys had good offensive nights or good just impact nights. But Siakam was awesome on the offensive end. Obi Toppin was amazing. We'll talk about him to close this segment. TJ McConnell was quite good. The star of the show, though, was Tyrese Haliburton. Always the biggest takeaway when he has games like this, right? Especially given how his season started. 4 threes in the first quarter. That's always a good thing for a guy that struggled to have that kind of firepower. Sometimes in full games this season, seeing him get going like that early was huge, I think, for his confidence in the Pacers. I actually think that his hot start was a little detrimental at times, right? 4 threes in the first half. Did I say the first quarter? No, I was right. The first quarter. Because he had some heat checks in the third quarter that I thought, he should not be shooting these. This is a little too much, but when you're feeling it, you're feeling it. So you guys know that I've been tracking a couple things with him. One is his volume of threes, right? When he takes 10 plus, that's now happened 7 times. The Pacers are 6-1. He's not going to take a lot unless he's making them. The only time he took 10 or more and didn't reach 40% from deep was their win over the Celtics. He was 2 for 10 that night. So of course, because of who he is and the heat checks he takes, there is a strong correlation between makes and attempts, which does logically make sense. But when he gets him up to this extent, 15, he just looks like a beast. And the Pacers are good when he scores, which is another part of his threes. And I talked about this on this podcast many times, even with Jonathan Smith yesterday, right? The Pacers entering this game were 6-2 when Tyrese Haliburton scored 20 points in a game. It's not even that high of a bar to clear given who he is. He smoked it in this game, getting to 32. They're still when he goes over 30, they're undefeated. When he reaches at least 30, they're now 3-1. He was awesome on offense. When he gets going from deep, not only does he create advantages for the team when he can, space it out just by having that presence. The Sixers have to think about him and defend him farther out than they want, but it makes it easier for everybody else to get open from deep. And that's how they took 38, which isn't a lot, but for them is a healthy number this season, I think, given their personnel available. They shot okay from deep. They put a lot of pressure on the rim. And all that was a lot of that was possible because Tyrese Haliburton looked like a stud in this game. Pacers 56 points in the paint, 38 3-point attempts. That's what I'm talking about, right? Like that's what they should want to be talking about. When they lost to the Memphis Grizzlies and the Detroit Pistons, I asked, what are the Pacers taking away? That's what they were giving up was a bunch of threes and a bunch of shots at the rim. And they lost both of those games kind of pathetically. Tonight they had their biggest win by margin of the season, and they looked good in both those areas. That's what I'm talking about when I say this stuff. So good stuff there. Siakam was awesome. 23, 8, and 3, plus 19, 9 for 11 from the field. He played well. He made his shots. He was typical Pascal Siakam, just tough to guard, spin into the right zones. They had a moment in this game in the first half where the Sixers missed a free throw and got their own offensive rebound. There were no centers on the floor for the Pacers at the time, but it was still, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Drummond, but still. Pascal Siakam was mad. Like he was clapping and yelling like, get the rebound. And I think those kind of things matter a lot for this team to have him be like that. Pacers did end up with 41 boards in this game. Sixers had 47. The offensive rebounds were absolutely brutal. Drummond, 5, 4 for Ricky Council, 4 for Kelly Oubre. That's about the only thing that went Philly's way. They had a stretch late in the third quarter where the Pacers had 4 guards out there because there was so much switching going on by the 76ers. And what that led to is a ton of offensive rebounds for that Philly group, which kind of changed the game. But the Pacers changed it right back early in the fourth quarter and erased it. So that was the only really down part of the Pacers' offensive night was that stretch of the game. Everything else, they had a pretty consistent offensive attack. I talked about Tyrese, said that he played very well. I thought despite having a 5, 4, and 7 night, Andrew Nembhard was awesome. He defended Tyrese Maxey pretty well. Obviously, Siakam was great. I liked Ben Mathurin getting up some catch-and-shoot threes in this game. 5 3-point attempts, 4 assists is a pretty healthy stat line for him. I think in terms of that combination of hitting both of those numbers, he's only done it once before this season. That's correct. The last time he did that was the Boston win, another game that they played pretty well as a team in terms of the shots and things Bennedict Mather needs to be approaching. But the guy I wanted to close the first segment with, and another guy Jonathan Smith and I talked about yesterday, is being key against Philly. Obi Toppin was awesome. His tempo matters so much against the Sixers team that does not want to play like that. They just don't, right? They're 29th in pace. They want to drag it down. They want to get their shots with their stars, and Tyrese Maxey gives them a jolt sometimes, and that's great, but the way they want to play is not that fast. And Obi Toppin says, no, I'm going to come in and impose the will that I want and make this game a fast game. 31 minutes for him. He played more than Siakam. I actually put it in my notes in this game when Siakam checked in for Obi Toppin in the fourth quarter, just in case. Like, that's how good he played. And it worked out fine. Siakam immediately hit 2 shots and put away the game. But Obi played that well that I wondered, was that really the right choice? 7 for 11, 2 threes, 4 free throws, 8 boards, 3 assists. 3 steals, no turnovers. What a game from Toppin, who had 20 points, flying to the rim, alley-oops, making threes. When he hits the tempo right and he gets an opponent like this, there's just some teams that he just does this to. Philly's one of them. Atlanta's one of them. New York sometimes can be one of them. He looked great in this game, and he played pretty good defense, which is unusual for him. He was very good. In what might be his last game, he's required to be backup center for most of the night. Obi Toppin was awesome. I thought he was the biggest difference maker off the bench. The only bench player with a positive plus-minus, mostly because he played with starters. Really great game from Toppin. Really great game from Haliburton. Everyone did something of value, whether it was Mathurin defending a star, TJ McConnell making the bench go. Jarris played solid defense. Furphy hit the biggest shot of the game to me in terms of momentum, shifting things back toward the Pacers. And Enrique Freeman and Quentin Jackson both scored in garbage time. Everybody who played did something. They got a great offensive night. They got a great defensive night for the context of their season. They have not been able to follow these kind of games up. Last week, they had a great game against the Bulls, feel good kind of night. They fell flat on their face at home 2 days later. They have to avoid that against the Pelicans because this was what the Pacers hoped their season could be this year, was a game like this. And they got it. And they also got a new center. Thomas Bryant is coming to the Pacers. We'll go pretty generic here. We'll do more of a how Thomas Bryant can help thing like I always do early next week because that's how I do things here. But they did it. They're trading for a center, a guy I predicted could be the case. Why does this make sense to the Pacers and Heat? Could Thomas Bryant play pretty soon? What's all going on here? We'll get to that next year on Locked On Pacers. Before we talk about some Thomas Bryant, we need to talk about FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. How about that? The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen. Check out Locked On Sixers. Don't know if they'll go till Monday, but they'll certainly be talking about this and Joel Embiid getting hit in the face and the Sixers just trying to get some wins, man. Whew. They look bad. Worse than I thought. Bad's a stretch, but worse than I thought, even when all the stars are playing. I was pretty wrong about them. A lot of anti-Sixers people in general feel pretty good about their take on that. I still think they'll figure something out at some point. Maybe I'm just too anchored to my initial take, but Locked On Sixers will have more on a struggling team dealing with injuries. The Pacers have a center, another one, Thomas Bryant. If you listened to, again, Tuesday's podcast here, you heard the explanation on why I thought that trade made a lot of sense for the Pacers and the Heat. The biggest one being to me, look, first of all, Thomas Bryant's like a fine player, right? Like that's a start. He is an NBA quality center who can play 15 minutes a game for the Pacers. We'll see how good he actually is and how much he helps, but that alone is enough. They need a center that bad. So the reason this fit as a trade made sense to me is the Pacers need a backup center, specifically one making the minimum or less because of their tax situation. Check. Thomas Bryant makes the minimum after opting out and re-signing with the Heat this past summer. So he checked that box. The other thing that made this make sense to me is the Heat are way over the tax. Not way over, but they're pretty far over the tax. And so trading away Thomas Bryant for no money in return saves them like a good amount of money, right? More than his salary. It also saves them tax dollars and gives them time to stall before signing another player. So they save a good amount of money from this trade, which means, one, they're happy to trade him. But two means it would not cost the Pacers as much to get a serviceable player because they're helping the Heat free up wiggle room over the tax. So it made sense as a logical partner to me. One of the top 5 I'd been blasting people with of like, this makes sense to me. And I talked about it on this podcast. And so there you go. The cost to do that, because I think tax relief was not enough for just the Pacers or the Heat to do this now, right? They gave up a somewhat useful player really early in the season. They could have waited till the deadline, right? So for them to do it now instead of waiting, I think that's probably why they had a little more leverage on their side, even though they were getting quite a bit of savings. 2031 right to swap picks is the price for the Pacers. That's it. That's really not that much, right? If the Pacers are worse than the Heat in 2031, they gave up nothing in this trade, right? They just get Thomas Bryant. So that's very low it's a very low cost thing. A second round swap is the worst this could possibly go for the Pacers. And now they have Thomas Bryant, who has played 10 games this year for the Heat, 11.5 minutes per game. So when he does play, he's usually the backup center. But sometimes they go Kevin Love there. Sometimes Thomas Bryant has been hurt. Right, early in the season, he was their backup. Then he missed some time. He came back recently, but again, hasn't always been in the rotation. So his minutes all over the place. But usually on most teams he's been on, I would say, except for Denver, really, where he played in the regular season quite a bit, but not at all, hardly in the playoffs. He's been the backup five for basically like every team he's been on. In some places he started or played a lot. He had that season with the Wizards where he averaged 13 and 7 when he was 22 and started almost half the year. He averaged 14 points per game the next year with Washington. This was 4 or 5 years ago. You all know Thomas Bryant because you've been in the NBA for a while. A lot of you know him from IU. But anyway, so that's why the trade made sense. Pacers got him for a swap. He can play backup five right now, right? This guy is 27 years old. The reason this one kind of works to me from a basketball perspective for the Pacers is Thomas Bryant's clearly a backup. Like there's not a lot of like upward mobility there, but there's a lot of stuff he can do. There's a lot of stuff he can't do, but I think that versatility is going to matter on a Pacers team that requires a lot on offense. That Moses Brown was certainly a 5 feet and in kind of guy that was hard for them to just kind of plug in and go. Thomas Bryant can be a good at the rim player, right? His finishing's been good for most of his career. 80% inside 3 feet for his career. Some monster seasons finishing when he was with the Washington Wizards. This year, that hasn't gone as well. But the year before with Miami, he shot 76.6% at the rim and shot pretty well in the paint. That's great. He also is a 35.5% shooter from three, right? Something he's been doing since college, getting him up at least from long range. He led the league in 2-point percentage his second year in the league, right? So he has a little bit of can score from everywhere stuff. He's still got some athletic juice, and playing above the rim will matter, playing with Toppin or McConnell to the extent he actually plays, right? So I like that. Decent rebounder for his size, almost 7 feet tall. That might be rosy. Again, Hoosier people will know. 6'10" to 7 feet, I would say. Makes sense. Does not turn the ball over that much. Good rebound rates. His career rebound rate's about 16%. Pacers will certainly take that, given that they have not played very well this season on the glass. In fact, certainly their biggest weakness as a team. So I think they'll be happy about that. So there's a lot of stuff he can do. He's also, not the greatest defender. His hands are not awesome. There'll be some nights where it feels like he's just invisible out there, but that rebound rate he has would currently be by far the highest on the Pacers. There's two. Myles Turner has a 12.9% total rebound rate. That's the highest of their guys available to play. The only two above that are Moses Brown, who's gone, and Isaiah Jackson, who's out for the year, most likely. So this is a big boost for them potentially in lots of ways in terms of what he can do, and he's just better than the backup centers they've been playing. Again, he is limited. Like, his defensive limitations are there. He barely played during Denver's finals run at all. He'll have some inconsistent nights just given what his range is, but he can play, and that matters so much for this Pacers team. And his contract is guaranteed, so this is actually quite the commitment for them. They can't just get off of this one very easily. So they believe that he is the right guy, and that's why he is. This is going to happen. He is not trade eligible till December 15th. I'm putting this podcast out on the 14th, so they can't trade for him till Sunday in the first place. They play New Orleans that night. Maybe he plays in that game. I would suspect not. It's just a guess, because then they have 3 days off before going on a road trip where they can have a practice in Indy to potentially get him integrated and ready to go. So I think this makes sense, right? I thought it made sense before it happened. So obviously I think it makes sense now that it did happen. As someone who can do lots of stuff, I think the key will be his defense, right? I have no doubt, given his career trajectory, that he'll be fine enough on offense to get on the floor at times. The question is going to be his defenses allow him to stay on the floor for long, because not only do they need size, right? They've been relying on a lot of Toppin as backup five, and I don't think they like to play it as much as they do. Plus, they can play centers against other centers now off their bench. Myles Turner is averaging a career high in minutes, right? He was almost at 32 per game as of me writing about the Thomas Bryant trade. It's gone down, obviously, from the Philly game. And so, I don't know if they want that, right? I think they want that number to be in the high 20s as opposed to the low 30s. And so having someone who can swing those minutes away from Turner towards someone else, that's all valuable to me. We'll do a deep dive on Thomas Bryant, what he's good at, on a podcast next week, maybe Monday's show, depending on how the Pelicans game goes, if there's enough stuff to really dive into from that game. But for now, that's the trade. That I liked it before. I still think it makes sense. it makes a lot of sense that they would do this if they think Thomas Bryant's going to play for them and they need someone of that ilk and ties to the state. So win, I say. The Heat have to be happy with the savings, but this could not work if he can't defend well enough or is a clunky offensive fit, which is possible. That happened in Denver. We'll see where this actually shakes out, but I imagine this works to some strong extent. I think he'll be a much better option for them off the bench. Maybe not much better. I think he'll be a better option for them off the bench than Moses Brown was. So if you have any questions about the machinations of that trade or anything you want to say about Pacers Sixers, hit me up on Twitter or Blue Sky at Tony Aries. This podcast is on Twitter at Locked On Pacers. Not going to have anything Sunday, but Monday we'll be back talking Pacers Pelicans. I'll be in the building and then some time off for a couple more guests ahead of Christmas. Finally back in the rhythm of getting people to come on and talk about this team. Hope you guys have been enjoying the recent episodes. Much appreciated chatting with you guys. The mailbag was fun, and I'm glad games are back. 4 days off. Very arrhythmic for the middle of the season. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you're having a great weekend. We will see you on Monday.